Okay, so this is Capitolo 4, Strategie di comunicazione. We have already learned how to ask someone's name, informal come ti chiami, formal come si chiama. We have already learned how to ask where someone is from, di dove sei, informal, di dove, formal. And we have already learned how to ask someone's age. So, quanti anni hai, informal, quanti anni ha, formal. Another obviously very important question you might ask someone as you're getting to know them is to ask what they do for a living. So you would use cosa fai for the informal and cosa fa for the formal. You're used to looking at the questions and looking at the verb used in the question and mirroring that, which is a good strategy. However, in this case, the verb will change depending what the person does. Look at these examples. Tu Maria, cosa fai? And her answer is not necessarily with fare. She responds, studio informatica. But she could also say faccio informatica. If this person didn't study, they could say lavoro. They could say they could use any other verb to answer the question. Sono disoccupata, for example, I'm not employed right now. Sono pensionata, I am retired. Or when you answer, you could also say sono and then the name of the profession. In this case, this is formal. Lei, signora, cosa fa? And her answer is sono casalinga. I am house. I don't work. I stay at home. And again, you could use the answer sono plus the name of the profession. So in my case, sono professore, sono avvocato, sono medico, and so on. Or you could just use another verb explaining more explicitly what you do. So again, the new question introduced cosa fai, cosa fa. The answer could include faccia, but not necessarily. It could include a verb, as in the case of the undergraduates, studio, and then the name of their major. And then the professions, again, sono with the name of the profession, or in the case of some of our auditors, for example, I already mentioned this, sono pensionata. I think some of the students in the class are retirees. So sono pensionata or sono pensionato. Pensionato. Okay, let's continue on. Another very useful, not yet, let's continue before I get to that. So cosa fai or cosa fa, depending on whether it's a formal or informal context, and the answer verb plus subject, or it could be just any verb, or studiare plus subject or plus major, so let's say, or it could be also fare plus major. Or if you want to say what your occupation is, you could say essere plus profession. We give the example of sono pensionata or pensionato. And you could also lavoro al bar. I'll give you that example. Studiare, let's say, studio letteratura. And for those of you who are undergraduates, this would be a good time to find out what your major, the equivalent of your major is in Italian. You could go to the site, for example, of the Università di Bologna or Roma La Sapienza and find the closest match to your major. Keep it simple. You don't need to be too specific, just broad subject. You could say studio letteratura or faccio letteratura. Okay. Or you could answer with essere in the profession. So in my case, sono professore. Of course, it could be feminine, sono professore or professoressa. If you don't work, as in the case of some of our auditors, sono pensionata or sono pensionato. Or you could also, and this is kind of a bonus, fare plus article plus profession. Let's better start by it. You can say, for example, faccio la professoressa. Okay, so those are your options for saying what you do. The second strategie, the second strategia is to express compliments or to comment on something. And that is done, as you can see here, with che plus noun. And this example is, for example, che disastro, what a disaster. That would be the equivalent English expression. Or you can say che plus adjective. So you could say che plus noun, che disastro. Or you could say che plus adjective. Just to compare it with disastro, che disastroso. So that's an adjective versus disastro as a noun. Or you could use, well, I shouldn't start with the negative. I should start with the most common. You will hear this all the time and you will use this all the time. You have several examples here, as you can see, but the most commonly occurring ones, of course, you should not be surprised since we talked about this in chapter 2, che bello, che bella, che belli, che belle. And as you can see, that doesn't translate only into how beautiful, but could be translated how great, how wonderful, how nice. Che bello, che bella, che belli, che belle. And also the second one, che carino, che carina, che carini, che carine. So these are very common. But this is kind of the formulae for you to be able to see how they are constructed and how others are constructed. And then you can also have che plus adjective plus plus noun. And in this case, you will also use bello a lot. So you could say che bella, che bella, che bella bambina. Let's say che bella bambina, che bella bambina, or che bello spettacolo, and so on. Very common, this as well. I don't go into more examples because bello has a lot of forms, which you will learn in a more advanced course. So these are the basic building blocks for expressing compliments and for commenting. And you can go and listen to this to go through the pronunciation of all of them. And as always, in the end of the chapter, you have recordings of all the vocabulary introduced. And you have done this activity already, where you are giving examples of some of your favorite things. And if you don't know who or what it is, you will use the interrogative or the questions chi è, who is it, or chi sono, who are they, or cos'è, cos'è, what is it, and cosa sono, what are they. Okay. Moving on. We'll talk about this a little bit later on the corresponding section, but just so you'll know, and when we're using the verb essere, the interrogative cosa will elide, as you can see here. I'll add this one since it's in the title of this activity. Che bella idea. So with the adjective bello, the forms of bello will change and they mirror the forms of the article. So as you can see, bella, as it would be la bambina, bella bambina. It would be lo spettacolo, so it would be bello spettacolo. It would be l'idea, so bell'idea. But this you will learn either as you encounter them or in a more advanced course. Now we can move on. I welcome questions at this point before moving on to vocabulary. If you would like to ask a question, please unmute yourself. Okay, we will go on. We can always come back to any of this at the end. Vocabulary, a very useful vocabulary topic talking about your family. And just to remind you, take every advantage of the ebook and how interactive it is. As you can see, the symbol indicates that there are recordings that you can listen
Il
to.
padre di Alice si chiama Antonio.
So I would take every opportunity I can to practice saying things out loud, practice the pronunciation, especially in view of the oral exam that culminates the course. And of course, there are speaking activities throughout the course. You can also see that the vocabulary has
La nonna.
To speak about the family for this level, it is sufficient to talk about the most common relationships. So you have padre, madre, fratello, sorella. You have zia, zio. You have nonna, nonno. And of course, you also have cugina and cugino. We don't really go into much more detail. For the purpose of the oral exam, you will only need to speak about your immediate family, your famiglia nucleare, as they say in Italian. I'll put that in here. So that would be your madre, padre, sorella, fratello, or sorelle, fratelli, and that is sufficient. For the oral exam, you will be telling us your family members' name, their age, their and a couple of adjectives to describe them. So let me just give you one example since we're here already. So I'll say mia madre mia madre si chiama Carmen, ha 64 anni, è bella e molto bella e I won't make it more difficult on you. È bella e intelligente. And it is as simple as this. Mia madre si chiama, and then her name, then the number of their age. Don't forget the anni, and then and two adjectives, è bella, è intelligente. Careful with the pronunciation of this, è intelligente, which can cause problems for those of you who might have some knowledge of Spanish. And then remember, of course, the pronunciation of a, which is with a silent H in Italian. Then, of course, don't forget the pronunciation of Chia, chia, si chiama. Mia madre si chiama Carmen, ha 64 anni, è bella e intelligente. Okay, so just your immediate family for the oral exam. But you might encounter other vocabulary on the written exam. So familiarize yourself with all the vocabulary introduced here, and as always, you need to be very aware of the spelling. Make sure you work towards perfect spelling. There are other vocabulary terms introduced here. For example, single. In Italian, there are old words for single, but they're not used anymore. They use the word in English with an Italian pronunciation. So, chi è single, as if it were an L, chi è single. For modern families, of course, you could include parents who are divorziati, parents who are risposati. And of course, these are adjectives, so they will change depending on the gender and the number. So, i miei genitori sono divorziati. I miei genitori sono divorziati. And you could say mia madre è risposata. Risposata. So my parents are divorced. My mother has remarried or is remarried. Let's see. This exercise right here, you should do it with all the terms, with all the family terms. Il fratello di mia madre è mio zio. You will encounter something like this on the exam, I believe. Let's go on. Some important vocabulary, again, when we're speaking about modern families, you could have, if your madre is risposata, then you could speak about her partner as mio padre, or il marito di mia madre, or you could also perhaps say that if she remarried to another woman, you could say mia madre or la moglie di mia madre. There were other old words, but they have gone in disuse because they have negative connotations. If you have a half sibling, you could just say this person is mia sorella, or you could say that you have the same mother, abbiamo la stessa madre, or you could say abbiamo padri diversi, we have different fathers, or we have madri diverse, and so on. So you use periphrasis in order to avoid using words that historically have had negative connotations. Most important, perhaps, most important in general, I suppose. All this vocabulary could be important for you depending on what your family is like, but important in general is the word nipote. La nipote, il nipote, because this one has two meanings. It could be niece or nephew, or it could be, sorry, not nice, niece, or it could be grandchild, okay? So no distinction, you would just figure out which one it is based on the context. Another very important vocabulary for everyone would be i miei genitori, i miei genitori, that not to be confused. Oops. versus, I meant, i miei genitori as opposed to i miei parenti. Okay, so i miei genitori is my parents. I miei parenti, which students often confuse, is not my parents, but it's my relatives, okay? So i miei parenti, my relatives. And of course, if depending on the composition of your family, you could have a plural, le mie madri, or i miei padri. And of course, nipote is also very important because it has two different meanings. And let's move on. Other possibilities, of course, if you have no siblings, then you're very lucky for the oral exam because then you would just say sono figlia unica or figlio unico. Other important vocabulary, of course, is adottato. You can just keep it simple. You can just use it you can use it as an adjective. Sono adottato or adottata or adottato. Or you can say genitori adottivi. Adottivi. And again, or madri or padri adottivi or adottive. And I think that's all for the family. So I will ask you to let me know if you have questions. Please unmute yourself and let me know if for example, for the oral exam, if you have a particular family situation that needs vocabulary not included here, please do let me know now. Or you can also email me, or even better, write your question via the group chat ahead of the exam. Any questions? Then we can move forward to the next section, which is possessive adjectives. So there's a review of possessive adjectives. You'll want to go back and look at these. The most important ones, of course, being those to talk about yourself. So that would be la mia, il mio. If I miss any typos, please don't hesitate to let me know. As I said, I have a limited vision at the moment. La mia, il mio, le mie, i miei. So we have la mia if your possession is feminine and singular. Il mio if your possession is masculine and singular. Le mie if the possession is plural and feminine. I miei if the possession is plural and masculine. So these are the most important ones because these are the ones you learn first. But again, you'll need to review the other ones as well. And remember, very important, that the gender and the number don't depend on the person. They depend on the possession, not on the possessor, but on the possessor. Sorry, not on the possessor, but on the possession. In this chapter, we're talking about families. The possession could also be a person. But again, whatever is yours is what determines the gender of the possessive, not your own gender. So just to give an example, so I am male. I would say mio padre, mia madre. Let me skip those examples for a second. I am male and I have both male and female friends. So say la mia amica si chiama Michelle. So here I am using the possessive. I am male, but the possessive does not depend on my gender. It depends on the gender of my friend, and she is female. La mia amica si chiama Michelle. Very important to keep that straight. That's a very common mistake because we're used to always paying attention to the gender and number of the subject. And of course, I skipped this for good reason, because there are particular rules for using the possessives when you're talking about your family. As you can see from these examples, if you're using a term that refers to the family, let's say term for family member, and it's singular, here, member, and they are singular, plus sign. Term for family member, singular, unmodified, and we will go into what it means in a second. Unmodified, then no article. Singular, unmodified, no article. And of course, it has to be a family member. So for example, I already gave you these two examples. It's not il mio padre, because remember, normally you have possessives and they require in Italian the use of the definite article. When you're speaking about your family, that is not the case. It is not il mio padre, it's mio padre. It is not la mia madre, it's just mia madre. So you can have, just to go through the examples that you might need for the oral exam. Mio padre, mia madre, mia sorella, mio fratello. Okay. But if it is not singular, in other words, if it is plural, maybe commas would be better. Family member, singular, unmodified, no article. Family member, plural, no article. Yes, article. So you could have for your immediate family, for example, le mie sorelle. It's plural, so we use the article, le mie sorelle, or I miei fratelli. And since we're here, let me give you another hint as you're preparing for the oral exam. So let's say that you have two sisters. You need le mie sorelle. To introduce them, you might say le mie sorelle si chiamano. We have si chiama if the person is singular. Mia madre si chiama. We remember mi chiamo if I am speaking about myself. Ti chiami if I'm speaking to you. Si chiama if I'm speaking to you and it's a formal context. Si chiama if I'm speaking about someone else, as in this case, mia madre si chiama Carmen. Le mie sorelle si chiamano Carmen e Elizabeth. Okay, so I am introducing my sisters, and then I can go on talking about one of them, probably the older one. So you can say Carmen, 30 anni, è intelligente, è, è ordinata. And then I would talk about the other one, Elizabeth, eccetera, eccetera. That's the easiest way to introduce your family if you have siblings. Use the plural to talk about sisters or brothers. Le mie sorelle si chiamano, or it could be I miei fratelli. I already have it here. I miei fratelli si chiamano Luis e Michael, eccetera, eccetera, as I did in this example. Just a strategy for the oral exam. And that is pretty much it. No, it's not, because we have exceptions as always. Exceptions. If it's singular but modified, singular modified or altered, and I'll go over what it means, what the difference is. Altered, then yes, article. What do I mean by modified and altered? It's that you add an adjective, for example. The most common ones when speaking about family are maggiore and minore. So I could have la mia sorella, but it's modified by maggiore, si chiama Carmen. Or you could have also il mio fratello minore si chiama Michael. Okay, so if we have an adjective that modifies it, and as I said, when speaking about the family, we most often have maggiore or minore, older or younger. Then we have the article. So we have mia sorella, but la mia sorella maggiore, mio fratello, but il mio fratello minore. And we also have other common exceptions to this rule, although there's a little bit of variation here. I'll just simplify for now. We can say la mia mamma is not madre, right? It's mamma, so it's a modified or altered. That's what I meant by altered. You have la mia mamma, or il mio, not mio padre, but il mio papà, or in Tuscany and in Dante, babbo. Il mio papà, il mio babbo. These are not let's say proper terms, padre or madre. These are mamma and babbo, la mia mamma, il mio papà, or il mio babbo. Don't say il mio papa. I know it's a very timely topic right now. Il mio papa. Because this is only, well, this would be applicable to you if you were Catholic and Francis had not passed away. So make sure you pronounce with the accent on the final syllable if you use this. Il mio papà. Il mio papa at the moment doesn't exist. Or we have a sede vacante. La mia sorella maggiore. Okay, that's, I think that's all. I know one more important one. So we said that if it's a proper term, and we're speaking about the family, no article, but we have la mia familia. The word familia itself requires the article. La mia, I'll just bold that as well. Familia. La mia familia. The word familia itself requires the article. And then one final exception. Even if it's singular and unmodified, when using loro, that always takes the article. La loro madre. Remember that loro is invariable, it never changes. So we need the article to tell us the gender and the number, as it happens already with the adjectives. So with loro, always article. Okay, let's move on. And again, this is when we are talking about family. If we're talking about things, other possessions, you always use the article with possessive. I'm happy to take questions now. If you wouldn't like to ask a question, unmute yourself and let me know, because reading the chat at the moment is difficult. We can move on then, and we can come back if need be at the end of the session. So before the next section, we have, I'll just put it under the same section since it's the same topic. We have, we have a review of your interrogatives, your question words. Review interrogatives, question words. The first thing, che cosa or che or cosa. All of those, all three of those are equivalent to our what? Che cosa or che or cosa. And we have he, we already talked about that it means who. And these are super useful. Again, you'll need to use these for the oral exam when you're asking your partner questions. So be sure to review these key. And then we have dove. And we're asking someone where they are from. Again, for the oral exam, dove. And at come, which means how, usually. But I would remind you that it could also mean what is it like. That often confuse students when they encounter that question. And they think it means how are you or how are they or something like that, but we remember that come stai and come stanno, come state, and so on. That's how you ask how they are doing, not with come sei or come. So this is a special use of the question word come. Then we have, of course, perché. If it's a question, if it's a question word, it means why. But if it's not a question word, you remember that it means because. Okay? And then we have cuando. Sorry. Which is when. What else? Yes, we have dove, quando, and cosa. I mentioned this above when I said some cosa, dove, and quando, plus the verb essere in the third person plus e, they allied. So you didn't say cosa è, you say cos'è. And careful with the pronunciation. You don't say dove è, you say dove. And especially with this one, it tends to cause problems in speaking for beginner students because they will pronounce it as dove, forgetting the accent. But dove, it means where is it, or where is she or he, and dove, just where with no verb. So careful with the pronunciation here. The accent falls on the verb cos'è, dove, and you could also have quando, quand'è. When is it? With the accent on the verb again. Cos'è, dov'è, quand'è, and not to confuse dov'è with dove. So elision of interrogatives and we'll see one more that can be problematic. So the new interrogatives here are quanto and quale. They are interrogative adjectives. So quanto is going to be declined like bello, and quale like intelligente. So quanto, so you remember that adjectives like bello will have four forms: bello, bella, belli, belle. Just the same, an adjective, interrogative adjective like quanto will have four forms: quanto, quanta, quanti, or quante. And the form depends on the number, and the gender depend on the noun that follows it. This is what determines the gender. So just to give you two examples, quante sorelle hai? How many sisters do you have? Or you could say quanti fratelli hai? And as you can see, the form of quanto depends on the noun that follows it. Quante sorelle, quanti fratelli. With the verb, I'm sorry, with the adjective quale, then it's a lot easier because you only have two forms, like intelligente, intelligenti. You have quale and you have quali. Also plus noun. They're adjectives, remember? So noun. Or most of the time they are nouns. And sorry, most of the time they are adjectives. So you could say quali, these examples are good. Quali film preferisci, or if it's singular, if it's plural. Quale, quale materia preferisci? So what subject do you prefer? But you have quali materie preferisci? Which subjects, plural, do you prefer? And I chose the word materia advisedly because you know that it's materia, so it's feminine singular. If I want to ask someone what subject, what single subject in particular they prefer, so I would say quale materia. But if I want to speak more generally and find out what subjects the person likes, then I would use the plural, materie. But since this is an e adjective like intelligente, the plural form is going to be quali, not quale, as students often get confused. I mentioned that quale is generally or it's here introduced as an adjective mainly, but it also could be an adverb, such as these that we saw already, in which case it's followed not by a noun, but a verb. So we have quale, we could also have quale plus essere. So qual, but there's no elision. You would expect to see the same pattern, right? Cose, dove, quande, with the apostrophe that indicates an elision. In this case, there is no apostrophe and no elision. We have just the last vowel that drops, qual e. So no elision, no apostrophe, no elision. If you do make that mistake, you're in good company because this is a mistake that even Italians, no, it's elision. Why is marking it incorrect? I don't know. This is a mistake that even Italians make where they add the adjective, add the apostrophe and make the elision, but it's not technically correct. And another very important thing is not to confuse cosa and quale. So you could have quale, um, which in colloquial English, we would just use what? What is your favorite color? But technically that is an error. I mean, not tech, but technically it's an error, but of course in spoken English is not considered an error because the correct translation of the most technically correct translation would be which. So students have to confuse these two because they are used to seeing what for both. What is your favorite color, not which is your favorite color. So they will just use these two interchangeably, but they are not in Italian. In Italian, to use the correct one, you must think, in English, would I use what or which? And that will help you make that distinction. And to make it even more confusing, you could also replace quale with que. But the most important thing is to understand the difference between che cosa and quale, what versus which. And I can come back to this if it's not clear. And I think that's all for this section. It's a pretty short section. Again, please review the in the preceding section, as I did here, all the interrogatives, not just these new ones, because you need those to form questions for your oral exam. Let's go on to actually, I will take a short break. I will be right back before we go on to the next topic. So just bear a second, just a couple of minutes. Okay, I'm back. Section 4.3, we are reviewing irregular verbs. You know that, of course, the course is cumulative. Learning languages builds upon previous knowledge. So you will need to review the irregular verbs that already have been introduced, like essere, like avere, andare, fare, uscire, venire. So go back and review those. I think they're reviewed at the end, right? No, they're not. Okay. But yes, review irregular verbs introduced earlier, especially those are which most common. So, essere, fare, andare, uscire, venire. And here we're introduced to other irregular verbs, which are similar in form to avere. So here you have o, dare do, sapere so, stare sto. And we already know stare from the expression to ask someone how they are doing. Come stai? Come sta for the formal. Not used that much in Italian, this verb, except for really in the expressions come stai and come sta. And obviously you could also come state, how are you all? And stiamo and stanno and so on. That's really the main context that you have to worry about using stare. Sapere, again, the form is similar. So o, do, so, sto, I, dai, sai, stai, a, da, sa, sta, and then anno, danno, sanno, stanno. The noi forms are a bit, there's some differences. The ones for avere and sapere are the same, so abbiamo, sappiamo. The ones for dare and stare are the same, are similar, so siamo and, diamo and stiamo. And then, of course, we remember the verb fare, faccio, fai, fa, facciamo, fate, fanno. You cannot learn this verb fast enough because it's used so much in Italian. So make sure you are solid on this verb. You'll need to know all of them, of course, but fare is just super common. The verb sapere means to know, but there's another verb in Italian, which is conoscere. It's regular, but it just its form. So sapere we see already that it's irregular. So sai, sa, sappiamo, sapete, sanno. Conoscere is regular. So the only thing that changes is the pronunciation. Conoscere, conosco, conosci, etc. So they are not interchangeable. They're both equivalent to know in English, but they're not interchangeable. Simplifying a lot, we can say that um, conoscere is used when you're talking about people and places. For example, il professor, conosco la professoressa Olsen. Conosco la professoressa Olsen. My colleague is female, so we use, and she's a person, of course, so we use conoscere. Conosco la professoressa Olsen. And il professor González Chavez conosce Roma molto bene. Professor González Chavez knows Rome very well. Rome, of course, is place, so we use the verb conosce. Sapere, on the other hand, is used with when speaking about facts or information, and is usually accompanied by an interrogative, a question word. To give you just one example, so dove, I'll turn it into a mini dialogue to make it less confusing. No, whatever. It's sai dove, sai dove la Cappella Sistina. Do you know where the Sistine Chapel is? Sì, sì, la Cappella, or you can just say more naturally, sì, è come on accent, sì, è a Roma. Yes, it's in Rome, or actually no. Sì, è in Città del Vaticano. Can you see accent? I cannot see that accent at all. Okay, that's correct. Leave it alone. So this is a fact. Yes, it is a place, but look what is in there. It's not asking you, do you know the Sistine Chapel? In which case you would use conosci. Conosci la Cappella Sistina. Do you know the Sistine Chapel? The place itself. It is asking you if you know where it is. Sai dove? Where is the highlighter? Here it is. It's not asking you, it's not asking you if you know the chapel itself, the Sistine Chapel itself. It's asking if you know where it is. So it's asking you for a fact or for an information. And as you can see, there is the interrogative. And that's simplifying a bit the use of conoscere versus sapere. We have already seen bere, correct? Another verb which is similar to that. Dire is a verb dire. As you remember, the bere is conjugated with the archaic root, a hypothetical bevere at some stage in the development of the language. And likewise, so it's conjugated with that root. So therefore you have bevo, bevi, beve, etc. And I'm adding that third form to remind you that there's the alternation between e and a, with ere and ire verbs having e for the third person, are verbs having a for the third person. So just like bere, dire is conjugated with an archaic root. Dicere. Actually, this is not hypothetical because it actually happens in Dante. So we have dico, careful pronunciation, dici, dice, etc. And you have here the full conjugation. The verb dico, dici, dice, diciamo, dite, dicono. Again, review all your irregular verbs that we have covered so far, and make a particular effort to learn those which are very, very common in Italian. So we know fare, essere, venire, uscire, and so on. What else do I need to tell you? Yes, sapere has another special use, which is to know how to do something. So I like to say this, I like to explain this in this way: sapere plus a verb in the infinitive expresses ability, which in English requires the verb to know how to do something, to know or to be able to do something. So as you can see, in English, we use the verb to know, or more commonly, the verb, or we express the idea of ability, but with the verb, we say can, right? So let me just give you the example to make it easier to understand, and I can explain. So suonare il flauto. In English would require this. I can play the flute. Okay, so whereas we can have these different ways of saying that you are able to do something in English, in Italian, you must use the verb sapere, and only sapere to be able to express that. So suonare il flauto. Anytime you have two verbs that complement each other, in other words, that work together, the second verb is, it remains in the infinitive. Okay? Then returning to dire, not to be confused with parlare, which we have already learned. Dire versus parlare. Dire has two equivalents in English, to say or to tell. Parlare, to talk or to speak. So when you are trying to figure out the difference between these two, dire and parlare, think about or remember the fact that they are equivalent to four different verbs in Italian. Dire, to say or to tell, parlare, to talk or to speak. And I think that's about it. I already reminded you that state is really only used to say come stai, come sta. You could also say to stay at home or to remain, but really, in this case, you could just use essere, sono a casa. In fact, sto a casa sounds more like a colloquial rather than standard Italian, so to speak. So really, come stai, come sta. Otherwise, don't really worry about using stare. And I think that's all. I would remind you of this minor detail. Once we learn prepositions, you will see why, but the third person form of dare has an accent. Da. And you will see why. It's to avoid confusing it with another word, with another da, which is a preposition, not a verb. Don't think there is anything else here. Adjective agreement. That goes with the next section. So we kind of talked about this a little bit when we were talking about strategie, commenting or making compliments. Che bello, che bella, che belle, che belle. We recall that we have two classes of adjectives. We have adjectives, let's call it a first class, like bello. And we have the second class, which is like intelligente. And if you look up a word in the dictionary, you will always find that in the case of adjectives, the one that is always given first is the masculine singular word. So first class adjectives have four forms. And second class only two. We recall that bello is the masculine word, but the masculine form, but of course we have also bella, and we have the masculine plural, belli, and we have the feminine plural, belle. With second class or e adjectives like intelligente, we only have two forms, singular and plural. Intelligente, intelligenti. So adjective agreement, you might want to go back and look at that. Let's see. And this is because in this chapter we are learning about making comparisons. Comparisons of inequality, which are, it's pretty simple to use. You have basically this form. You have for more than, which is the most common one, più plus adjective plus d, the preposition d. Don't worry what that means. Just learn about this as a fixed structure or fixed expression. And we have meno plus adjective plus D. So to give examples, let me give you these two examples using my favorite characters from Italian literature. Laura è più bella di Francesco. So Laura è più bella di Francesco. So Laura, and then Beatrice, Dante è meno intelligente di Beatrice. So Dante and Francesco Petrarca, Dante Alighieri. These are the two most famous authors of Italian literature, both poets. Dante, author of the Divine Comedy, Petrarca, author of the Rerum Vulgarium Fragmenta, lyric poetry versus narrative poetry. And Laura and Francesca are their muses. So Laura è più bella di Francesco, Dante è meno intelligente di Beatrice. And here we have, as we noted, più plus adjective plus z, or meno plus adjective plus d. So the fact that we're working with adjectives should alert us to the fact that we need to pay attention to gender and number. Oops, I had bolded the wrong word, meno. Let's see. Laura è più bella di, meno intelligente di. Now, when we are making comparisons, the form of the adjective, the gender, and number of the adjective will depend on the subject, so the person who comes first. So Laura is feminine and singular. So of course, the adjective will be the feminine singular form. Laura è più bella di Francesco Petrarca. And we could also change that around and say Francesco è meno bello di Laura. In the first case, we use bella because we are speaking about Laura first. Laura è più bella di Francesco. In the second case, we're speaking about Francesco first, so we say Francesco è meno bello di Laura. And of course, I change it around to keep the idea the same, right? Laura is more beautiful than Francesco, therefore Francesco is less beautiful than Laura. And same thing, so Francesco obviously masculine singular, and therefore we use bello. Or we could use Dante è meno intelligente di Beatrice. Beatrice è più intelligente di Dante. If we have an O adjective, the gender and number matter. But if we have an E adjective or a second class adjective, the gender doesn't matter, but the number does. So intelligente, Dante intelligente, Beatrice intelligente, it's both singular, so it doesn't matter. but the number does matter. And another thing matters is that if we have a plural subject, then we have to use not but sono. Laura e Beatrice. So we have a plural subject, two people, Laura e Beatrice. No longer but sono. Sono. Più belle, because it's an O adjective, it's a first class adjective like bello, or it is bello, and therefore we need to use a feminine plural form. Più belle di Francesco e Dante. So we have to pay attention to three things here, or two things here primarily: the form of the verb and the gender and number of the subject, in this case, feminine plural, two women. And in this case, I reminded you with second-class adjectives like intelligente, the gender doesn't matter, but the number does. So we could say Beatrice e Laura sono più intelligenti di Dante e Francesco. We have here a plural subject, and therefore we need to have the plural form of the adjective. We recall that intelligente only has two forms, intelligente, intelligenti. Therefore, we use the plural form. And I remind you, I use this syntax in particular. I put Beatrice and Laura first so that you are reminded that you need to be careful with distinguishing between first and second class adjectives, because you might be tempted to use intelligente because you're thinking feminine plural, but it's a second class adjective. And so intelligenti is a correct form. It's not a masculine plural, it's just a plural. But with first class adjectives like bello, then you would be correct. Laura e Beatrice sono più belle. And then other than that, pay attention to the form of the verb because it will change. È più bella, è meno bella. But when we have the plural, we have to use not è, but sono. Sono again. And I believe that's all you have to worry about for this. It can get more complicated, of course, but for this level, this is all you need to know for now. And yeah, that takes us to the end of our session. Again, I'm happy to answer your questions, so please feel free to unmute yourself, or you can use the chat now if you want. I can now look at the chat if anyone wants to use it. Any questions? If not, then I say we can, one more thing actually. Let's talk about the format of the exam. And for this, I will stop sharing my screen. So the test has 13 sections. The first section is, of course, as usual, Strategie di comunicazione. And you will have 5 questions, and they are matching. where you read a situation and you react accordingly with some form of que plus noun or adjective. Matching, so it should be pretty simple. Second section, again, it's Strategie di comunicazione. And in this one, you have a combination of both using che plus adjective or noun, using the verb fare to say what you do, and using stare to ask how someone is doing. But it's all matching, so you just have to complete the dialogue with the word bank that is provided for you. Pretty simple. Question 3, or section 3, it's based on the family. So you have the diagram of a family tree, and you'll have a recording.
Chiara è la figlia di...
You have a recording that tells you a certain family relationship, and you have to say whether that is true or false based on the family tree. Section 4, same thing with just a different family tree. Section 5, vocabulary. We're now in Lessico. So you will have again a family tree, but this time you have to complete the sentence with the term for the family. So that's one example I could give you. So you will have, let's say that Laura and Beatrice are mother and daughter. So you will have Laura e blank di Beatrice. So you would have Laura e la madre di Beatrice. Laura being the mother, Beatrice the daughter. So Laura e la madre di Beatrice. Laura is the mother of Beatrice. I hope that's clear. Let's go on. Section 6, same thing. For these two sections, you are just being tested on the vocabulary. So you will need to use the article. Don't forget that in Italian, you always need your article. So you'll be using, when you use the terms, you will say like la madre, il padre, la sorella, il fratello, la figlia, il figlio, and so on. Don't forget the article here, because here you're not tested on possessives. When we get to section 7, so that's for sections 5 and 6. In section 7, you are going to be tested on the use of the articles with possessives. So you will have a mix, cases in which you will need to use the article, and cases in which you will not need to use it. So just remember singular, family member, unmodified, not altered, you don't use the article, except if it's loro. Same thing for section 8. Section 9, we are reviewing irregular verbs. So you have verbs that were introduced here, but also verbs that were introduced in previous chapters, just so you know how to conjugate them correctly. Same thing here. You will use verbs in section 10. You will use verbs that are introduced in this chapter, but also verbs that were introduced in previous chapters. So review how to conjugate regular verbs of all three types, are, ere, and ire, and then review how to conjugate irregular verbs, all the irregular verbs that have been introduced so far. And as I told you before, the best way to learn verbs is to conjugate them fully and check your answers using an online verb conjugator or some other kind of resource like that. Writing them out. I know that it seems counterintuitive to be writing on paper for an online course, but that really facilitates memorization. So I strongly recommend it for studying. If you are not writing, then you are not studying, I like to tell students. So keep that advice in mind. Question 11, section 11 is on interrogatives. So you just complete the mini dialogues with the most logical, interrogative from the list given, keeping in mind that quanto is an adjective, so you will have to pay attention to the noun that follows it, because it will have to match its gender and number. You don't have to worry about elision or apostrophes, at least not here. No, you don't have to worry about elision or apostrophes, just to remember the gender and number with quanto and the noun that follows it. So that's section 12. Then the last section is section 13. You'll have some illustrations of people and you will just make comparisons of them. Again, I went over how you need to be careful to make sure the verb matches the number of the subject and the adjective matches the gender and number of the subject. So go back and look at those examples. And I think this is all, unless you have any questions. Last chance to add your questions. All questions are helpful for everyone, so don't be hesitant to ask. Okay, if there are no questions, we can stop here. Thank you so much for taking your time to do this on a Thursday evening, and happy studying and good luck on the test. And I will see you all in person finally on Monday. Ciao, ciao.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Grazie.
Thank you.
Grazie. Grazie.